Hello, I'm Zach Ashton. This is the untold story of the Kent State Massacre. As Americans, we want to believe that the government protects our rights and keeps us safe. But there have been times in the past when it's the government that we need protection from. A major issue today in America is balancing the rights and freedoms of the United States citizens with the powers of the government. Many seeds of this issue were given light decades ago with the Kent State Massacre on May 4th, 1970. A day when the trust of Jeffrey Miller and other Kent State students was betrayed. With us today, telling this story is former professor at Kent State and Hanover College professor Nancy Rodgers. Thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Let's rewind back to April 30th, 1970, when President Nixon announced that the U.S. military was going to invade Cambodia, expanding the war after he had promised to end it. College campuses around the country erupted in protest. You were a young math professor at Kent State at the time. What was the atmosphere on campus like?
On that day or leading up to that day?
On that day.
On that day. Well, before he made the announcement, everyone was very concerned about the war. The previous December, they'd started the first draft lottery, so any student that was 19 to 25, their birthdays were drawn in a national lottery, and if their birthday was one of the first 195, they were automatically drafted unless they got a medical disability. So a lot of students were very upset about the war for moral reasons, but also concerned that they themselves might have to go and fight in the war and be part of the horrific scenes they'd seen on the TV news every night. We'd see wounded soldiers with their limbs blown off and thousands of coffins being unloaded from the planes in the DC airport. And it's one thing to be called upon to defend your country, but it's quite another to be forced to go kill innocent people. And during the Vietnam War, we'd killed over 3 million Vietnamese, and most of them were civilians. We dropped over 7 million tons of bombs on them. That's more than one atomic bomb a week, and this is the very little country of Vietnam, which is no threat to the U.S. So quite a few students, they didn't want to go for they were very opposed to the war for personal reasons because they didn't want to go fight it, and they were also opposed to it for moral reasons. It wasn't just dropping the bombs. Our country was doing a lot of other atrocious things that I would hear students talk about at the rallies. There was a rally just the previous week in which one of the students was talking about the millions of gallons of Agent Orange that we had dropped. It was an herbicide that killed all the foliage so the Viet Cong would have no place to hide, and it also deformed the people, and we're still seeing these horrendous birth defects today from that. And I especially remember one student that got up and she was crying as she talked about, our military designed bombs that looked like toys. They looked like brightly colored balls and shaped like pineapples, and they didn't explode when they dropped them, and the kids would pick them up and play with them, take them back to the village and blow the whole village up. So, these bombs were not designed to kill soldiers, they were designed to kill kids and civilians. And and then the napalm. The Friday before the Cambodia invasion, there was this really provocative leaflet that was distributed around campus where Bill Arthrell, who was a sophomore history major, he was going to napalm a dog. And it was right at noon in front of the student union, which was right outside my office. So when I went there, there was a large crowd, a lot of police there, and the county prosecutor, because they were expecting to arrest him. And the first thing that Bill said was, how many of you are here to stop me from napalming a dog? And a few people held up their hands. And he said, well, then you must have a conscience if you're willing to take action to stop me from burning a dog alive. And then he pleaded with them to take their conscience one step further and to take action to keep their government from napalming people in Vietnam. So there were a lot of, the students on campus, they were really, concerned about everything that was going on. And then that evening he announces the Cambodia invasion, that he's expanding it to another country. And, that was just kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back.
Okay, so as students, they were not safe from being drafted?
Oh, no, 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 no. And this was the first. Now, see, before that, if you had connections, if your family had connections with the Selective Service Board, or you know, whoever drafted them, you could get out, or you could teach. If you taught high school, you could get exempt. But they changed it that year, so it was just going to be, it was your birthday. And I was going to ask you yours to see if you would have been drafted. But no, my brother's was number 3. So if you were in the first 195 that were drawn, you were going to go unless you had a medical disability or could fake one. That's why there was a lot of draft dodgers. They left the country. They went to Canada, or they hid out, you know, or they starved themselves and made themselves have medical disability. So no, there was no way to get out of it. That was the first year that happened. So that contributed some to it. See, what I read later, that what Nixon didn't want to do that, but they had to get enough soldiers, and it was he wanted a voluntary army, but who's going to volunteer for that? And he figured that by doing that, at least the half of them that knew they wouldn't have to go, they wouldn't be at the demonstrations. He thought maybe that would cut down on it, but it really just made it worse. So there's a lot on students as it's not like, you know, we hear similar things today when we're going to, you know, invade Iraq. You know, we didn't see student protests because the students they were going to have to lay their life on the line unless they volunteered to do so. So it was very different back then. Plus, they had seen that war in a way that we don't see our wars today, because the military don't let the newsmen go in and get that kind of footage that we were seeing every night on the news. Little kids running down the road on fire.
So the next day, May the 1st, you helped organize a rally where students buried a copy of the Constitution.
Right, it was a group that I belonged to. Actually, it's more the graduate history students, right. They had a rally. Most of the rallies were there in the Commons in front of Taylor Hall, and one of the history students got up and talked about how Nixon had murdered the Constitution because he invaded a country without getting approval of Congress. And so he very dramatically takes up his history book that had a copy of the Constitution. He rips the pages out, and his friend had a shovel over there, and he digs a hole and they bury it. So, you know, it was a very symbolic move, and they talked more about the war. And then at the end of that rally, they said that there would be another rally on the next Monday, that's May 4th at noon, you know, and they said, everybody bring your friends. And so that was, you know, the first one, and then there was one the next Monday.
Okay. So the message you were trying to convey was that by taking this action, Nixon had killed the Constitution.
Right. Well, right. It was illegal. I mean, the legal scholars say he did not have the legal authority to do that. And actually, he had already been bombing Cambodia secretly for the previous year, and nobody knew about it. So, no, he did a lot of things that were illegal.
Okay. Things escalated quickly overnight after the rally. The next day, there were violent protests downtown, the burning of the ROTC building, and the National Guard coming onto campus. Do you think that the message may have been misinterpreted by some?
How do you mean that?
I don't know, maybe the message of the rally, maybe some had misconstrued it.
Okay, let's first start. The Friday night after the rally, all the students were down. There's a lot of bars in downtown Kent. In fact, students come from other towns there to drink too. There were a lot of bars downtown, and they went down every weekend and they drank. And a lot of them drank too much, as they do here and every place else. And so this was one of those Friday night scenes. But because of the so this was not just old protesters down there raising heck. It was a bunch of students down there drinking. So not only was it students, there was a motorcycle gang down there, the Chosen Few, and they were out in front. I wasn't down there, but you know, I had been down there before, and then so I heard people talk about what was going on, and they were revving up their motorbikes, and there was it was a warm spring night, you know, the spring fever. It had been a long cold winter. It was the first warm night they'd had down there, so all the students were coming out and hanging out, and the police were cruising up and down the street, and then after a while the students started jeering at them, and as often happens when students drink too much, things got out of hand, and somebody picked up a rock, and they started throwing rocks, and then broke a lot of windows. 15 stores had their windows broken. So yeah, you know, that shouldn't have happened, but that was not just on account. things happen after football games when students trash the town and stuff like that. So, but anyway, when that happened, that set the thing into motion because the mayor called in other deputies to help, but he also called Governor Rhodes. The governor was running for the United States Senate. The election was it was a very heated contest. The election was the next Tuesday. He was behind in the polls. And usually if there's a state of emergency, it's good for the party in power, and he was the governor at times. So anyway, he called the governor. Then the governor the next day the National Guardsmen were close by up in Cleveland putting down a violent Teamster strike. And for that Teamster strike, they used blank bullets. The representative comes and talks to the mayor, and then 5 p.m. that day, the mayor officially asked Governor Rhodes to bring the guardsmen into Kent. But they could only go in Kent. They couldn't come on the campus because the president at Kent State did not want them on the campus. The students hadn't done anything up there. A bunch of students drunk downtown, did some stuff, but they were not allowed on campus, all right? So that was one issue, was that night, okay? So each one of these things you mentioned, they're really very different kinds of scenes. So when the National Guard they come into Kent, but they're not on the campus, okay? So Saturday night, the ROTC building burns, and there's been pages and pages, thousands, tens of thousands of pages written about Kent, and most everyone agrees it's very mysterious about the burning. I was on campus that night at a film festival. When I got out, it'd been going on for a while, but the building was still up there, so I talked to some students who were there, and they said they couldn't believe it because there was a couple of people, they didn't know who it was. They had been trying to burn the building for over an hour and not a policeman was there. There were faculty observers there. They couldn't believe it either. The Kent State Police Station was just a couple buildings away. Nobody was there. And so these couple of people kept trying to, set it on fire, and they couldn't. It was an old wooden barracks. You'd have thought they could have. Then they broke a window out, and they did set the curtains on fire. And the fire trucks came. They put it out. It was all the way out. I knew one of the teachers, Denny Cook, who was a faculty observer that night. He went in, the fire was all the way out. And so the fire truck left. And so I was standing up there, I thought, oh, it's all over. So I left, and a lot of the students left, and a little while later you turned around, the building's all up in flames, and nobody knew, well, what happened? How did it go up in flames? So, it was an old World War II barracks, and been condemned for a long time. It was scheduled to be torn down anyway. So I have no doubt in my mind that it was agent provocateur from the government that set it on fire, so that they would have a reason to bring the guard on campus. They did, especially after the COINTELPRO files. I don't know if you've heard about those, but in '72 there was a burglary at one of the FBI offices, and they stole all these files that the FBI had, and everybody's surprised to see they had this thing it's short for counterintelligence, and it outlined all of these criminal things that the FBI was doing against the anti-war movement and radicals in the country and the Black Panthers and everyone. So the FBI did a lot of criminal actions, and in those files there's also, it says that 3 days after Kent State, an FBI agent was involved in setting the ROTC building on fire in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. So, there's no proof, but here's the thing about it. I wanted to read you this quote because the Kent State, the administration appointed a committee to investigate it. And they said that the persons involved in the actual incendiarism were few, and they were separated from the main crowd and could easily have been apprehended by the police. Yet no one was arrested, and even afterwards, there were all sorts of undercover agents there taking photographs all over the place. They had pictures of who did it, but no one was ever arrested. So it's very, very strange. So I have other people can debate it, but I have no doubt. So that was very strange. But at any rate, it gave a reason that Rhodes could claim to take over the campus, although legally he didn't have the right, and he brought the guard on campus. Okay, so it was a conflict between the state and the university, throughout this whole thing, and then the next morning, Rhodes flies into Kent and has a big press conference in which he makes all these very inflammatory statements about students. He said they were what did he say? He said the campus protesters were the worst type of people in America, and that every force of law should be used to deal with them, you know. Well, most students didn't hear him do that, but people thought, what? You know, what is he trying to stir up here? At any rate, that day, the guardsmen, you know, they were the same age as the students. You know, it was a nice May day, and everything seemed kind of okay. Although there's guardsmen all over campus and helicopters flying around, it's like we'd been invaded from Russia or something. But that evening, a lot of students went out and sat on the steps of the administration building. They wanted President White to come out and talk with them because they were upset about the guard being on campus, and you know, like we're in a military state or something. And he wouldn't come out, or maybe he was at home, but the guard told them they had to leave, and they refused to. And so the guard started shooting tear gas at them, and then things went from bad to worse, and a couple students got bayoneted, and one girl had her lung punctured. So that was Sunday evening, you know, before Monday. So by Monday, students are really upset. You know, there's been they'd done some things that were wrong downtown, you know, but then there was other stuff that went on too. But you know, by the time we get to Monday, there was a lot of people at the demonstration. It wasn't a demonstration; it was a rally.
Okay, so yeah, as you're saying, by Monday, May 4th. Tensions between the guards and students have increased substantially. Students were protesting on campus, even though protesting was banned. You were in attendance, but you were observing to help preserve the peace. The guards start breaking up the crowd by using tear gas, and you cut through a nearby school building to avoid the gas. While inside, you heard sudden loud noises that you assumed were blanks being fired off, but they were not blanks. When you ran outside, the first person you saw was Jeff Lee Miller, lying on the ground bleeding. I can't imagine coming outside to see that.
Yeah, I couldn't either. I had a hard time believing it. At first I thought he was doing guerrilla theater, and you know, sometimes people would do that back then, and playing like he's dead and had brought some ketchup or something, and it just took a while for my mind to accept what had happened. And then I looked down, Joe Lewis was laying on the ground just a couple feet from where I'd been standing, and students had his head up trying to give him air and stuff, and you know, some of the students were still laying on the ground because everybody hit the ground, and you know, they were afraid to get back up, but you know, people were getting up, but you could see students laying all around, so it was very terrifying scene. You know, none of us thought they had loaded guns, and people say, oh, well, if somebody's got a gun, you got to think it's loaded. No, back then we didn't. They used blanks with the Teamsters, okay, and that was customary in crowd control. That, in fact, that was one of the guards' own guidelines, that you know, they couldn't put in live bullets when they were around crowds like that, only when they were against an armed enemy, and the students were not armed. And look, there's a difference between a protest and a peaceful assembly. I hadn't seen any protests. Now, a couple years before, there was some SDS on campus, and sometimes there was some actions that you might classify as a protest, but I don't consider somebody getting up talking at a rally about what they think any different than a teacher getting up in a classroom to talk about what they think. It's just the right to free assembly. So, you know, the students that day, no one came there for a confrontation. You know, they didn't want the guard on campus, but you know, when that little Jeep drove up and down the Commons, and you know, right at the beginning of it, and said, you know, everybody has to leave, and we thought, why? You know, that they didn't have the right to tell us to leave. They shouldn't be here. You know, this was our campus, and we had the right to meet if we wanted to. So that's the way everyone felt. So. I didn't see it as a clash at all. It was, they said, no, you're not going to meet, and you know, then they just kind of chased the students. The students were laughing at them. I had been at demonstrations in D.C. that got scary with police coming in busting, and I thought, oh, I'm getting out of here. This was not like that. I never once felt threatened. Maybe I was stupid, but they were on the football field. They'd get down and point the guns in different ways, and we would just laugh at them. We thought they were blanks. No one dreamed that they had live ammunition, or that they had M1 rifles that were that powerful. The bullets went over a mile when they shot them. It's a wonder they didn't kill more people than they did. You know, so it was. everybody sees it from a different perspective, but from my perspective and from a lot of other people's, even, let's see if I have this quote here from the FBI. The FBI, well, I can't find it right now, but after May 4th, they closed the university down, and Nixon appointed the Scranton Commission, a congressional committee, to investigate the shootings. The FBI had over 8,000 pages of reports just about Kent State. They interviewed over 1,000 people at Kent. And in their report, they said there is evidence that the guardsmen fabricated their story after the event, that their lives were threatened. And the FBI said there was no riot, which meant that because that the guardsmen could be charged with criminal acts. If it had been a riot, they were doing their jobs. But the FBI said it was not a riot, you know. So everything got distorted because of the parties in power, you know, and the way the media presented it. But if you look at the documentation and the various reports that have come out, the guardsmen weren't threatened at all. They didn't have to shoot. You know, the only person that did shoot there was an undercover agent. Terry Norman was his name. He was a student at Hanover. He worked for both the FBI and the campus police. And he was taking pictures that day, and he had a gun on him. And apparently, well, students are very sensitive about getting their pictures taken because then the police would use it to charge them with something, you know. So I guess some students were telling him not to do it, and he gets scared. He pulls out his gun and he fires it 4 times. There are witnesses that said he fired it all these times. And it's come out now that there was always argument, did he fire before the guardsmen or after, but now there's a video of him after the shootings, and you can see it online if you Google Terry Norman video, of him running down, being chased, going to the policeman and handing him his gun. He was an FBI agent, or he worked for the FBI and the campus police. He was the only student with a gun on campus, and he fired it. You know, so it wasn't the anti-war people that were causing the problems, it was the other side.
So you noticed a Red Cross first aid truck, and you went to them to help.
Right. When I had walked over there, they were parked on the other side as I walked over there, you know, the first thing. And so when I first see Jeffrey and Joe Lewis laying there on the ground, I remembered seeing that big Red Cross, and so I ran over there, and I was expecting them to, you know, be bringing it over. They were just, truck was just sitting there, and there were all these guardsmen just standing there like nothing had happened. And I went up to the guy in charge, I'm pretty sure it was General Del Corso, and I said, look, students have been shot over there, you've got to get some medical help over there. And he said, we can't send our medical help over there because we have to keep them here in case our troops get wounded. And I pointed to my armband and I said, look, I'm a faculty member. There are innocent students over there that your troops shot, and they're laying on the ground bleeding to death. You've got to, you know, send them over some medical help. He said, lady, I don't care who you are. If you don't get out of here, I'm going to have you arrested, you know. So I turned around and went back over to the other side. And, you know, those students lay on the ground a long, long time, you know, when there was medical help just on the other side. So to me, you know, why wouldn't he send it over, you know, if you accidentally hit somebody when you get out and try to help them, you know, unless you're a hit and run driver. But, you know, you know, the only reason I can think of is that there was some talk ahead of time that what the whole Kent State was about is they wanted to make a strong example to discourage anti-war protests in the future. You know, something horrible enough happened there at Kent State, then they thought students in the future all across the country would think twice about, you know, going to an anti-war rally or an anti-war protest, but it backfired on them. Well, maybe it didn't. I mean, the war still went on another 5 years, and students today certainly don't get out and protest about much like they did back then.
So you were left absolutely helpless to help the students who had been shot,
The what?
to aid the students who had been shot.
Right, right. I was left absolutely, I'm sorry, just
Helpless
helpless.
to aid
Yeah.
them.
Well, yeah, I didn't know first aid or anything. I walked around. All the students, there were groups of students that had gathered around and formed a hand ring to protect them. And after a long time, the ambulances came, and there were so many of them. There was 13 of them that it took several runs to take them all away. So finally, they go off to they're all gone, and so everybody just walked silently to back to where we'd started on the other side, on the commons, and sat down on the ground. And the guard told us to leave, and nobody moved. It's like everybody was just shell-shocked, and we just sat there. And then some people were getting up, talking about, what we should do or what have you. And I looked up behind me, it's a ravine, that goes up like this, and there was a row of National Guard, single line row, all the way around, surrounding us with their guns pointed up, silhouetted with their rifles pointed up in the air. And I was about ready to jump up and tell the students that, look, you've got to be like Gandhi and don't be intimidated by the guns. But at the same time, Glenn Frank, who was a chemistry professor, he'd just been up begging with General Tel Corso to tell his troops to put down their guns. And the general had told him, you've got 5 minutes to clear them out, or then we're going to clear them out. He comes running down into the middle of the commons. He had tears streaming down his face, and he said, I don't care if you've never listened to anybody in your life. You've got to listen to me now and leave here immediately. And he collapsed. He collapsed right there on the field. And some students got up and helped him up, and everybody was so moved by what he said that everybody got up and we left. And so that was the end of that. And I remember walking off back to my office, and there was a National Guardsman over there, smiling and happy. He said, how's everything going? I said, you mean after the students were killed? He said, yeah. I mean, it's like, yeah, a lot of people didn't seem to be concerned.
In the aftermath of the massacre, 24 students and 1 faculty member were indicted. You helped start a legal defense fund with the help of a colleague to aid the students and faculty member.
Mm-hmm.
Many people outside the college didn't support this. You even received threats. What kind of threats did you receive?
Well, let me go back just a little bit. I'm pretty sure it's from the FBI. Why would they do it? But the 25 students that were indicted, some of their charges were just ridiculous. They indicted the president of the student body, I think his name was Craig Morgan, because he was there that day. He had run on a platform of nonviolence and changes through the ballot and stuff. He was indicted, all right? Then there were some other people that were indicted for other stuff, but, they indicted a sociology professor because he'd written a paper that was critical of the Guard after it happened. His indictments come out in October, several months later. It looks like, these charges are rather trivial, but not back then. They could have spent many years in prison, okay? And so it was going to take a lot of money to defend them. So it was us against the state, So we raised over $250,000 nationally through mailings that we did, and we worked with a famous lawyer, William Kunstler from New York. He was an ACLU lawyer, and lawyers in Kent and Akron and Cleveland. And we also did educational things. We probably never heard of Dr. Spock, but he was real big back then. He was a child, wrote books about how to raise your kids. He was very much opposed to the war. We brought him to campus and stuff. But anyway, because of my work with the Defense Fund, I was a target for the FBI. I didn't know it back then. Well, I suspected some stuff, but it's only since this COINTELPRO expose has been that they did this all across the country. The FBI, I'm from Carrollton, across the river here, went to my hometown, showed their FBI badge, and started asking people questions about me, and everybody's wondering, what did she do? They went to my dad's bank and asked to see his checking account to see if he's given me any money. Well, the president called my dad and told him. Well, my father was very upset, and my poor mother, she was a sweet little first grade teacher, a devout Baptist, and she was completely devastated. You know, she called me crying. You know, she didn't think I was a criminal. You know, I played the piano and organ every Sunday in church when I was growing up, and I was a valedictorian and everything. But she thought that the FBI didn't investigate people unless they were criminals. So first of all, they did that. And then there was an FBI agent from my high school that I knew. He was a senior when I was a freshman. He went to my sister, and he told her, he said, you tell Nancy that if she doesn't stop what she's doing, that she's going to be in serious trouble or danger, I forget what she said. You know, what was I doing? I wasn't doing anything illegal. All I was doing was raising money for a legal defense, which is a constitutional right, that you have the right to a fair trial. And I wasn't a radical. I didn't give speeches at rallies or that sort of thing. I was in the women's liberation movement, and I often wrote letters to the editor in the Stater when people would make sexist remarks. But other than that, you know, I certainly was not a terrorist. So anyway, those happened. That was rather minor, but I would see the phoneman working on my the telephone man out on my pole in front of my house a couple times a week. I figured they were taping my phone calls, but you know, I wasn't doing anything, so I didn't really worry about it. Then, all right, so the serious incidents that involves this where my life was threatened, I have to give you a little bit of background. The next year, May '71, there was a big disturbance downtown, much bigger at the bar scene. And 60 people were arrested and severely beaten, including my husband, who I'd recently separated from. He was a faculty observer down there wearing the armband, and he'd gone down there with other faculty members to try to help keep the peace. And you know, a policeman's coming over towards him. He said, I'm a faculty member, and the guy didn't believe him, so he's pulling out his faculty ID, and the guy knocks him with his billy club down to the ground and beats him and breaks several of his ribs. And they beat up several other faculty that night. And my husband was going to sue them, but when he went to his lawyer, who worked at the courthouse over there in Ravenna, his lawyer told him, if you sue the police, you will be harassed for the rest of your life, you know, as long as you're living in Kent, you know. So he didn't sue them. So I was very angry at the police, you know, because they, you know, beat up a lot of people needlessly, and the police state, you know, we were living in a police state. So a couple weeks later, I get a phone call, and a person asked me if I would work for if I would be an escort for CEOs of corporations that when they flew into Cleveland, and just go out to dinner with them, and I would be very well paid to do this. Well, I was flabbergasted that I had been called because I had 2 small children and I was not a loose woman. And so I said, well, why are you calling me? And he said, well, because you're a professor and they want to have intelligent conversation over dinner. And, you know, so that's, you know, they just want to have dinner. So I thought a moment, I got this flash. I thought, oh, this might be a way. I knew it was a long shot, but I thought this might be a way to get something on the police. So I said, well, I couldn't do that because if the police found out, I'd lose my job. And he said, oh, the police won't find out. He said, we have them paid off. I said, well, that's easy for you to say, but I would need proof if I'm going to risk my job. He said, he assured me he could give me proof. I said, told him I'd think about it, and he said, call me back. So as soon as he hung up, I called up a lawyer who's worked with the Legal Defense Fund, and told him about the phone call. And he thought it was a good idea to see if we couldn't get some dirt on the police. So he said he'd call some other people and then, you know, see what we could set up, you know, how we're going to expose this. So he calls me back the next morning. He had talked to a journalist at the Beacon Journal, and he was going to call the FBI and get them involved because, you know, it's a police corruption thing, and tap my phone, and he was going to get a female undercover agent to take my place, you know. So I was supposed to tell him when he called back that I've decided I'm not going to do it, but I have a friend, and, you know, give him his name. Well, before Bill gave me the, he still didn't have who the name of my friend was, and the guy called me back. So I made an appointment for him to stop by to give me the proof on Saturday, and then I was going to tell him that, well, I can't do it, but I have my friend, or maybe she would have been there, you know, with me. Then it was later that day or the next morning, Bill calls me back and he says that the journalist called him back, and he had called the FBI and, you know, told them about the possible police corruption, and if they'd help investigate it, and tapped my phone. And when his contact called him back, he said that no, he said, we can't get involved with this. He said there's a federal agency involved. So he told the journalist, said, you tell her to get out of this immediately, that, you know, they're going to try to do something to discredit her, you know. So the lawyer called me up and tells me this, and I said, he said, you've got to cancel that appointment. And I said, I don't have his phone number, and he's coming on Saturday. He said, and then we're thinking, well, you know, if they're coming over here, he said, well, whatever you do, don't get in the car with him, because they're probably going to drug you or shoot you up with an overdose of heroin. You know, and then my body be found somewhere, hey, professor with the legal defense fund, you know, dies of an overdose, you know, that sort of thing. So I said, well, what am I going to do? I can't call the police. I can't call the FBI. So we had a mutual friend that worked for the Legal Defense Fund, Ken Hammond. He said, why don't you call Ken? You know, he had a rifle and a tape recorder. So he came over on Saturday, and I sat on when the guy was supposed to come by, I was sitting on the front porch. It was, I think, 1st of June, and Ken was inside the window laying down. He had the tape recorder and his rifle in there, you know, listening. So kept watching for the cars go by, and every time I'd see a car coming up the street, my heart would start racing, and some of them slowed down, but nobody ever stopped. And then after an hour of doing this, the phone rang. So Ken and I ran in there to it, and he turned the tape recorder on because he figured it might be him saying something had come up, and it was him. And he said, we know what you were planning to do, and we're going to kill you, and you're going to end up and put a concrete blocker around your feet and throw you in the river, you know. Well, I knew to get that call that the FBI had to have told them, because they were the only other one that knew, you know, that I had done that. So I figured they were just trying to scare me, but, you know, they'd killed Bobby Seale, a lot of Black Panthers. I mean, they had been known to kill other people. So I was worried. I was especially worried for my children. So I sent them to stay with the grandparents in Kentucky for the rest of the summer. And, you know, I was paranoid for a long time. I'd have nightmares, wake up thinking somebody's coming in with machine guns and stuff. Or every time I crossed the street, I made sure there wasn't a hit-and-run driver who's going to run over me and get out and shoot me up or something. So. And that's what, when you read the books that have been written about what the FBI did, they tried to scare people so that you just say, I don't want to do this anymore, it's not worth it.
Wow. This is an amazing story, but do you have any proof for these events?
Do I have any proof? We did tape it. I can't find the tape now. It's been about 44 years. I don't know if it was still, it may still be in my basement somewhere, but I haven't found it yet. I do have proof in the gentleman I mentioned, Ken Hammond. He's an internationally known Chinese scholar. He takes National Geographic tours to China a couple times a year. He was the guy that was there with me. So he was an eyewitness. He was there when I got the phone call and there that day. But proof other than that, no. I did file the Freedom of Information Act, and I put this very specific incident in it. I filed it in January. You know, why hadn't I filed it sooner? Well, I knew what happened, but I've been reading other books, especially Seth Rosenberg's book on the FBI's war against radicals, and I thought, well, I ought to try to get my story out there too. So I filed it and listed that along with, you know, the other things that they had done. And I filed it in January, and, you know, a month later, the CIA said they couldn't release my file because of national security. And see, who all did I get? I got the at the NSA I got first, okay? And then the CIA, I got their letter a couple weeks ago. They won't give me my file. And I haven't heard from the FBI yet. Okay, so there would be proof in there. However, they didn't always it depended on how bad the thing they were doing. They didn't always write it down on paper. But it's amazing some of the horrible things they did that they did write down on paper, if you read Seth Rosenberg's book.
Thank you, Dr. Rodgers, for your time and for allowing us to gain a new perspective on the Kent State shootings.
Thank you.
There's a balance between protecting the nation and maintaining order on one hand and protecting people's rights and liberty on the other. If proved, Rodgers' story shows the government targeting citizens for their political beliefs and actions. It's a reminder to remain vigilant. I'm Zach Ashton. Thanks for watching the untold story of the Kent State Massacre.